and also words using, what was it, monopoly, ponerology and psychology. And, well, we're going to find out what ponerology is because I'm going to introduce Mr. Malcolm Treacher. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for deciding to share the evening with me. I'll put the checks in the post tomorrow. Okay. There's a little story goes around about a lady that met Picasso on a train, and she realised on this train journey that she was actually in the same carriage as Picasso. So she plucked up the courage to get a piece of paper out and a pencil and said, "Mr. Picasso, will you please draw something for me?" And he said, "Yes, of course." So he went, handed it to the lady, and he said, "That'll be 12,000 francs, please." And the lady said, "But it only took you a few seconds." And Picasso said, "Madam, that took me 40 years." In a similar vein, although I've only come across Pewsey just from across the river, in Pewsey, it's actually taken me 10 years to get here, in a strange sort of way. And I hope tonight that I've brought something worthwhile for everyone. I'd like to dedicate the presentation to our children, all of our children, our grandchildren, and all the kind, caring, loving people who struggle in this world because it's run by some people who aren't quite like they are. But above all that, I'd like to dedicate this to my wife and partner for the past 45 years, Liz, who struggles to understand me, always has, but stands by me, even though I'm a complete head case sometimes. Thank you, Liz. They're back.
Yeah, they are.
Anybody have a look in the sky Saturday? Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I don't know how clear that is. I took these over Pewsey this afternoon. It's quite astonishing, really. I'm not going to make any apologies for being human and being thoughtful and considerate, as I just did. I see myself as being part of... you'll have to forgive me for this. Uh-oh. This is new kit to me. I've never used this. I've never used PowerPoint before. It's my first opportunity. Part of a rebellion, a lawful rebellion, perhaps. Let's hope we keep it that way. Of people who have just about had enough, and it's time to say no. And before we get too far into it, I'd like to refer to a group of philosophers and visionaries from the 70s, if I may. It's funny how the music industry historically has come up with philosophers and visionaries who state their case and then nothing happens. But there we go. So what is money? Well, fundamentally, it's an agreed means of exchange of goods and services within a community. And all that should happen, really, is that the amount of money that is in circulation matches the size of the economy. Currently, and this may have changed, the people have been saying this for about 5 years now, but notes and coins in our country amount to about 3% of the money that's floating around. And the other 97% is created as debt. Nothing else, just debt. No money. I've subtitled the talk Monopoly, Ponerology and Psychology. I could have picked half a dozen other subtitles because money gets everywhere, doesn't it? The monopoly in the equation is the monopoly that they have on money creation, the central banks. The Ponerology link is why they have it, and the psychology is how they manage to hang on to it. What I'm going to try and do is to show you how everything's linked together. So there's one way I can be different to everybody else, which is a bit of a theme that goes through the talk tonight. I'm going to have to assume some knowledge, but I'll try not to restate the obvious because we're all pretty clued up here. I'll try to be brief and coherent while I'm doing it. Now I need a slide. I'll be referring to various things, and what I've done is I've thrown together a list of links which will appear as a slide in a little while, but it's also available for email. If you want to find out more about the whole thing and perhaps get other people interested, I'm quite happy to email a list of links to do with the talk. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but as this is probably going out on YouTube, I thought it'd be a good idea that people can freeze frame it and read all the websites that it contains. What I'm going to try and do is make like the BBC, who are supposed to inform, educate, and entertain. But unlike the BBC, I won't give any pork pies. No lies, no deception, no calling mercenaries contractors, as is the case quite often, and no reporting of buildings collapsing before they actually have. And we've got to see this again. We can do that without the sound. That's Building 7, of course, at the World Trade Center that the BBC reported having collapsed about half an hour before it actually did. They still haven't cleared that one up. No. We are. I'll be drawing your attention to other people's work, other people and organisations, and I'll give them credit for their efforts wherever applicable. But again, it would be on that list of emails. The evening's been filmed by Matthew Williams, which is one of those two characters there, or it might be both, I'm not quite sure. The videographer of choice for the Alternative View conference and the local Rebellion Roadshow. And as I said, we intend to put the talk on YouTube, which is the secret vault, and on DVD, when we've tidied it up somewhat. My presentation is my interpretation of the information that has come my way, specifically over the last 7.5 years. But because of a psychological phenomena, the personalisation is likely to go much deeper than that. And the one that I'm referring to is pattern matching. This phenomenon is one of the ways that we are controlled, because the people that control us know exactly how this works. And it's basically a flowchart going from left to right, starting with actions or activating agents, the stuff which grabs our attention. And what we do as humans, we look for things in that we recognise, and then we match up to something that has already happened. And very, very often this is done totally subconsciously. We don't even know we're doing it. It's things that have happened throughout our lives. And that pattern matching process triggers emotions. And once we've experienced the emotion, sometimes we actually end up with a thought, but not always. What actually happens at that stage where we go to emotion is that once the emotions are fired, the logical part of your brain is switched off, which is why very often people end up having an argument and there's no hope of resolving the argument at the time, because the emotions have run high and you're not going to have a logical conversation, let alone resolve the problem. The subject of the money game is hugely complicated. They want us to think that it is. It doesn't have to be. But we do live in a world which has got really complicated. If I think back to all the consumer goods that we've got now to what we had when I was a child, it is quite astonishing, just purely thinking in terms of consumer goods. But we've also got now an absolutely massive knowledge base, particularly with the internet. And interestingly, two of my daughters, and this isn't one of them, this is my granddaughter, or one of my granddaughters. This is Charlie, who's 8. And her mum was recently had a moan to me that Charlie's keeping her up late at night asking silly questions. Well, not silly questions, but all sorts of questions about everything. She's an absolute powerhouse. She's just asking questions. Complete hoover. And by strange coincidence, this is Phoenix. And his mum came with a similar story. And Phoenix is only just 3. And he's got to the stage where it's all why, where. The old, why is an elephant got big ears, Daddy? That sort of thing. He pulled a brilliant one on me this week. He looked up at a clock on the wall and he said, "Grandad, what's that clock doing on your wall, Grandad?" It's just, brains are going, and we wonder why. And it reminded me of something that happened to me about 48 years ago, when I was due to leave grammar school. And we were more or less bullied into going to a presentation evening the year before we were leaving. And one of the speakers that they had there made a very interesting point, which I've never forgotten. He was concerned, and this was 1962. 1962. He was concerned that children were being overstimulated and they weren't being given enough time just to be children, 48 years ago. And he was pleading with parents to try and give children time to do nothing. And this has been with me ever since, and whenever I'm considering things, I think of this input. Where are you getting your information from? Things you see on the television, newspapers, conversations you have with people. You can have a certain amount of input and then you get overloaded. And in order to process or be creative, you need to hold back on the input, obviously. And once you've processed some of the information that you've had thrown at you, you then, if you're really lucky, you get to do something about it. And I would put it to you to have a think that what we're subjected to in our lives, increasingly, is an overload of input. And it's done on purpose so that we don't think. All the glossy magazines on the shelves and the newsagents and the supermarkets, all the junk on television, all the junk television channels, it is not an accident. It is done there like the old Roman bread and circus stuff. There's junk food in the supermarkets, junk programs on television, junk magazines in the shop to keep us busy, busy, busy down on the farm with the other animals while somebody else benefits. Right. I used the word monopoly on purpose. because people immediately think of the game Monopoly. But the monopoly that I'm talking about, as I said, is the monopoly that the central banks have on creating money as debt. That's very important. It's absolutely crucial. And now we get to the nitty-gritty of it. I actually took the name from a book which I found in an Oxfam shop a few years ago. On the door of the shop was Make Poverty History. It was Make Poverty History Week. And for some reason, I walked in the shop and I went straight up to the wall, saw this book with pound signs on it, and pulled it out, looked at it, thought, gosh, that's interesting. I didn't realise it was supposed to be a children's book. They thought it was a children's book. It isn't. It was written by this man, usually known as Norman Angell, in 1928. I say written, only half of it is a book, and it's a book explaining the game. It's a game similar to Monopoly, but it takes place on a desert island, and a lot of people that try to explain how the banks work end up with a community on a desert island. If you do a search on it on the web, you'll find quite a few people do that sort of thing. The book next to it, the book of 10,000 Things, is there to prop it up at an angle because the book's got an absolutely dreadful front to it, and the spine isn't particularly interesting either. But the book of 1,000 Things, 10,000 Things even, reminds me of the blue sky on Saturday because it's a children's book, and you can have a look at it if you look at it carefully later on. It's absolutely full of amazing things for children, and it made me realise just how rubbish our education has got. So Norman Angell. Norman Angell was doing what some of us are doing, but he was doing it in 1928. In fact, he ran away from England to America when he was 18, and he was doing his own awareness projects and his own what's really going on throughout the First World War and through the 20s and 30s. He wrote the book and invented the game to try and educate ordinary people as to how they were being ripped off by the banks. That's the cards out of the book. There's quite a lot on the web about this chap, by the way. And as I said, the game is played on an island. And in fact, I would suggest, and I think a lot of you probably feel the same way, that we've been born, everyone in this room has been born into an illusion, and they've lived in an illusion. And some of the things which have happened in the last 2 or 3 years have possibly highlighted the fact that it is an illusion, that things aren't very often what they appear to be. And to illustrate that, I've got a little set of props that I want to use to show you. These are, as you can see, transmission power lines, which, believe it or not, we used to have over our garden, not far from Pewsey. The focus tends to be on the pylon, which is absolutely harmless, because visually it's impressive. But in actual fact, the biggest problem is halfway between one pylon and the next, where the power lines dip nearer the ground, because they actually give off electromagnetic fields which perhaps are harmful to humans. There's a whole raging argument about it, always have been, but they have been linked to cancer. Now, when I found out we had a problem with this, I called in National Grid to do tests, and Scottish and Southern Electricity to do tests, and they both came up with very low readings that I wasn't to worry about. And I trusted them so much that I bought my own meter. And this was the first one. I've got about half a dozen now. And for about a year and a half, I could just walk out the back door, walk down the garden, and hold this meter up at head height and see what reading I was getting. And the vast majority of the time, on a particular setting, and I'm not going to pull a fast one on you here, I'm going to use the same setting in this room as I would have used under the power lines. They're about 10 megahertz. It doesn't matter what the nature of the value is, the fact that it's 10. The top range there from 0 to 100 is what is essential. So 10, I would say probably 90% of the time I would get a reading of 10 megahertz. And in terms of things not being what they're supposed to be, we've got here a mobile phone, which is supposed to give out microwaves similar to crumbs. Oh yeah, of course. There's various, I haven't even switched it on yet, and I'm getting a reading. That's because there's wireless internet in the buildings around us. Okay, I'm not going to even try to do that. What's never mentioned anywhere is that, as well as the microwave radiation coming from the phones, you've also got exactly the same power line frequency magnetic field that you get off power lines. And if Matt can switch cameras, if you watch the needle, right, I've got that about 6 inches away from the meter, and I'll dial someone in this room. We've got a good angle on that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better? Right, so if you bear in mind what we had before, 10 is somewhere near middle top, yeah? And it's on a scale up to 100. And this mobile phone is about 6 inches away. Now, first of all, you'll see it's going off scale, and you'll see it's pulsing. Yeah. And that is power frequency magnetic field coming from the mobile phone. 6 inches away. I've got a little friend of mine in here. Feel like a magician. Right. This is Sam. Sam's our gardener. And we got a similar situation here with microwave oven. You know, see the microwave oven. The story, again, I wasn't expecting that. We're absolutely saturated with microwave radiation in this room. Scary. I'll check that when I finish talking, but it certainly seems that way. But again, the story with this is, if you've got a faulty door, you need to get it fixed. The door seal can go. Other than that, they're perfectly safe, right? So, we haven't rehearsed this, have we? What I wanted to do, we might not be able to do it, is if I set that up over there, I actually checked someone's house over, and the young mother had a habit of sitting her 2-year-old son on the kitchen bench to the side of a microwave. And she was astonished to find that, again, way off scale. I mean, I can't leave that on very long. That is way off scale, and the meter's just chopping it. So, bearing in mind, stood underneath power lines, you've got a figure of 10, and just over a foot away from the side of the microwave oven, you've got well over 100. Yeah, easily. Okay. Cheers, Matt. End of story. Shall I cover that up again? Yeah. Right. I don't want to make a big fuss about that. I don't want to get involved in the very complicated discussions that go on about it. Other than to say that things aren't always, or very rarely, are what we're told they are. Like this one. Adam Smith Institute have been doing this for quite a few years now, and when you stop and think about it, it's quite astonishing. 2 years ago, your average taxpayer would work from January the 1st until June the 15th paying tax. It's quite complicated how this is worked out, but it includes all taxes because taxes are absolutely everywhere. You pay taxes that you don't realise you're paying. But the Adam Smith Institute makes sure they count them all, and the reality is that people work nearly half of each year just to pay taxes. Never used to be like that, and it gets worse and worse every year. Last year it crept up to the 25th of June, and this year they haven't got a hope of working it out because of the election. Okay. What I would say is that the banking system is built on fraud and deception, and that the debt-based money supply is legalised crime. It's immoral, unjust, unethical, and designed to extract our common wealth. And what I mean by that is, we are the wealth of this country. People of every country are the wealth of the country. That is where the wealth really is. And the banking system is set up to drain our wealth. That's what it exists for. And the financial world is supposed to be way too complicated for us to understand. So we have to trust and believe other people. Well, we know that we can't. And the whole situation is bollocks. And I thought, oh, at this point, I need a slide of a set of bollocks.
That'd be the donkey bollocks.
And I thought, well, I can't use human bollocks. That would be terrible, wouldn't it? I thought, how about donkey's bollocks? So I did a Google on donkey's bollocks.
The police will be round in the morning.
And I found this. The quality is bad, but the message is clear. I'm sorry the quality's so bad, but you know, the message is there, isn't it? It's just so easy to pick up the wrong idea, isn't it? Oh, yeah, I'll do it again, yeah. Okay. We're on to the second subtitle now. Ponerology. Poner what? The number of times people have said that to me. Quite clearly, Ponerology is the branch of theology which deals with evil, and political ponerology deals with it in politics and business, which is the same thing. There's quite a lot of controversy about the existence of evil and what it actually is, and hopefully one of these evenings we'll organise something around that. I've got a few people I'm trying to get interested. Ponerology is the crucial link between banks, the legal system, and large corporations. And in choosing Ponerology, I've hidden in the subtitle a spiritual perspective, which I seem to have in common with Harry Beckhoff in Marlborough, Ian Crane, Brian Gerrish, and David Icke, amongst others. Because trying to make sense of things on my own, I came to the conclusion that you can't put all this down to greed or a lust for power or a lust for massive amount of money, because it's way too big. There's something else going on, and regardless of how you define evil, or even if you don't even define evil, whatever's going on is way beyond the likes of us. It is spiritual, but it is negatively spiritual. Ponerology, what have I done?
Is there a black slide there or something?
I shouldn't have.
Go past it.
Yeah, must have gone back too far. Ponerology tends to focus in on what some people call true psychopaths. There is a area of thought which believes that psychopaths are actually born, that psychopathy is genetic, and that about 4, 5, 6% of any given population are born psychopathic. And I won't go into the details. Vinny will fill you out on this. Vinny, amongst other things, works for, or is Red Pill Press in the UK, and he knows this subject inside out. Whatever I mean, what we're talking about here is people who have no empathy, no sense of guilt, no concern for others. They can walk over people without any worries whatsoever. Just doesn't bother them. And what actually happens in society, and it has happened, and it is happening, and it is getting worse, is that 5 or 6% influence the behaviour of the rest of the population, and the sort of floating voters adopt their strategies, and you end up with perhaps 25% of the population behaving in that way. Yeah, I think between psychopaths, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and evil, well, we could have a really good debate sometime. Psychology, the third subtitle, and mind control. I thought, well, if this is Prison Planet, the walls of the prison have been built inside our heads, or perhaps our hearts and minds. Just give you one very brief example. I got a friend in Swindon called Jeff Brooks. He's a Reiki master, medium, psychology, whatever. He did parapsychology as well. And one day he was telling me a story about a tribe of people where the elders in the morning get together around a campfire and they tell each other about their dreams. And then they make decisions about what's going to happen in the village based on those dreams. And when you first think about that, it sounds absolutely crazy that you should organise a village's behaviour, or the behaviour within the people in the village, based on what some old men have been dreaming. But when you study the purpose of dreams and how dreams exist and what they're really for, you then realise that actually it might not be that silly. Particularly when you think what the vast majority of people do in this civilised country, where they get up in the morning, make a cup of tea and sit down, switch the telly on and watch breakfast TV. Like sitting around a campfire, talking about your dreams, what you end up with is sitting watching television being programmed by what they want you to think, with the same news every quarter of an hour. And one thing that really niggles me is when it's time to switch to what they call the local television station. They say, right, and now for the news where you are, right? And here we are in Pewsey, just as far from Bristol, which is what they're talking about, as London. But it's the news where I am, apparently. How do they know where I am? If they're going to be switching me over to Bristol, they haven't got a clue where I am. And then, to make it even worse, it's usually followed up by, see you in a few minutes. Nonsense. They can't see you. And we're watching this stuff, you know? Well, here's my friend Alec. The snowflake symbol reminds us that, just like snowflakes, no two human beings are exactly the same. We all have different experiences, strengths and weaknesses. We are shaped by our history, pattern matching, and even though we have much in common, each one of us is unique. An interesting thing happened when I met up with Alec a few years ago. He introduced me to a series called The Century of Self, which I know some of you are aware of, a chap called Adam Curtis, who does documentaries for the BBC. The essential part and relevant part of the Century of Self documentaries was the bit where he talks about big business, government, the CIA, and others getting to, others meaning the banks, of course, getting together with Edward Bernays, who was Freud's nephew, and conspired to direct the course of human development into mass consumerism. Remember I mentioned earlier about the amount of consumer goods that are around. It's a good set of documentaries, but it is limited by what the BBC allow people to say. In fact, I think I'm having another bollocks coming on here. Where's that donkey? Yeah, okay. And the strange thing was that Alec and the senior partners with Human Givens hadn't actually heard of a film and a book called The Corporation. And it's a very interesting thing here because I think it was about 2003 that they were brought out. And it came down to a Canadian professor emeritus in law got to wondering, he realised that a corporation or a limited company or that sort of thing has actually got a legal identity as a person. So you can have boards of directors as people, you can have shareholders as people, but the company itself has got a legal personal identity. And this chap thought, well, I wonder what sort of person a corporation would be. And he actually got well over 200 people working on it, including the FBI. And overwhelmingly, without any dispute whatsoever, what they came up with was psychopath. So the psychological profile of a corporation is that of a psychopath. No questions, no doubt whatsoever. And when you know about it, and you look for it in life, well, with me, it wasn't a case of looking for it. It was, oh yeah, of course it is. Things that you feel are wrong, the way that profits, targets, corporate values have replaced in the last 10, 20 years human values. So that, like in the NHS, it's not the patient that matters anymore. It's how quickly they're processed, that sort of thing. This is all part of what happened. And another thing that has happened recently, well, fairly recently, is that a lot of older people have been pensioned off early. They've been replaced. A lot of people who know how things work. I got this, when I suspected it, I got it from a chap who worked in the electricity supply industry, and he'd seen it happen. Where people who knew how to do a particular job, were very experienced, very knowledgeable, were just got rid of and replaced by people who'd been to university studying pigeons, and they were transferred into a serious position where they were, because they could be moulded, they end up as yes men and women, and they do what the corporation wants them to do. Much easier to manipulate than old people like myself who think, hey, this isn't how it's supposed to be. They don't want that. They want to change things to their way. And they're doing it. My own take, and this is only my take, I haven't agreed it with anybody else, I haven't found anybody else saying it, but I'm quite happy to say it. My own take is that what actually happened historically is that the genuine psychopaths created the corporation in their own image. It wasn't an accident. Some of the stuff you'll see in films that you read suggests that it was the old chaos thing and incompetence and, oh, you know, we didn't realise it. Nah. Psychopaths created corporations in their own image. Malcolm said so. Hello. Whatever. And I would say that given how they've had control of the banking system and the legal system over so many years, I'm not that far wide of the mark. And fortunately, just in the last couple of years, we have got people saying, hey, this isn't right. This shouldn't be happening. Because I think probably one of the biggest, worst cases that we've had is with our governments bailing out the banks. I've been aware of ordinary people struggling financially and the stress and strain and trouble that it causes. And if you read up on some of the human givens stuff, which is on the list of recommended sites, you'll see that human givens, and they're not alone in their way of thinking. They believe that the vast majority of emotional and psychological problems are created by our society. And I would suggest that it is the psychopaths that are doing that. And they are with the banks, they are with the large corporations, and people like us don't matter. We're there to be used. And with bailing out the banks using our money, I mean, for goodness sake, we've even had the EU telling our government what to do with our money. It's ludicrous. It's not altogether new, and the thing that it did after the Second World War, I thought for a while, was quite a huge step. But interestingly, at AV3, we came across one Russian chappie called Leonid Shiroskin. And in his presentation, which is on DVD, he discloses a remarkable insight that he came across. He was looking at the work of this man, Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer, yeah. A philosopher, physician and humanitarian. If you look on the web, you'll find there's nobody got a bad word about this bloke. He's a wonderful chap. Absolutely wonderful. Until you find out what Leonard found out. What Albert actually writes about in his books, his earlier books, is the situation in Africa. This is, by the way, this is the Alsatian. He was born in Alsace and did a lot of work in Africa. Sticking back on. And the story that Schweitzer tells is the problems that the corporations had in Africa when the colonies were being developed of getting people to work for them. Because the child of nature is a free man. That is actually a quote from Albert Schweitzer. And what he's referring to is that in the places where they needed people to work, the natives didn't have to work. Like we didn't have to work. About 400 years ago, your average Joe Bloggs in England did about 12 weeks a year of work. That's all we needed to do. And we didn't pay anything like the taxes that we pay now. It's a huge con. A huge con. What they found in Africa was that they had everything. They didn't need to work. And you never guess what they did. In order to persuade the men to work, they brought in taxes. They introduced taxes. So they had to earn money to pay the tax. And they brought in consumer goods. They imported consumer goods so that the women and the children would want to buy a dress, a toy, whatever. Household goods. So the men were psychologically shoved into a working situation like we were born into, which was unnatural for them. And they even purposefully didn't employ men anywhere near where the jobs were. If they had a mine or a timber thing to do, they would go down the river 20, 30, 40 miles and bring them in on a boat and keep them there for a year and then pay them at the end of the year. Because they were more easily manipulated when they were away from the families. And this is the sort of stuff that Schweitzer writes about. And they did this to rape the planet. There's an ecological aspect to this. So fundamentally, to increase the control of a population, all you've got to do is increase the taxes and increase the amount of consumer goods. Hey, that's where we are, isn't it? And this is precisely what the post-war meetings with Edward Bernays set out to achieve. But there is an article all over the place. There's various versions of it, but oddly, it's by a chiropractor, and it's on his chiropractor's website. It's one of the chapters. Again, it's on the list. Some places it's called the doors of perception and the language of spin. In other places, just the doors of perception. And in other places, why Americans will believe practically anything. I thoroughly recommend you find it and read it. He explains the detail of all this without the constraints of doublespeak that the BBC imposed on Adam Curtis. And talking about the BBC, we've got to get to Holly Greg, not sure how to pronounce it. We're all aware of this, yeah? Not everybody is. Anybody seen it on BBC? ITV? Sky? Anywhere? In the newspapers? It's banned. Robert Greene, the reporter who dug all this up and is doing a marvellous job, he's been arrested twice up to now and released again. He was telling us at AV4 that because he's a journalist, he actually got the BBC interested in the story originally, and they went on, and I think he said they spent 3 weeks interviewing people, and they had plans for a programme in Scotland, a programme in England, and a panorama programme. Seriously, BBC did about 3 weeks' work on this for a panorama program. And subsequently, he phoned to bring them up to date on something, and he was told that it had been blocked. Now, this is a paedophile ring in Scotland that goes as high as you want to. If you have a look on David Icke website, you might find that our own Prime Minister is mentioned. It goes really high. It certainly goes as high as the BBC. There are people involved in paedophilia that the BBC will not tell you about. And the problem, it's not just the horror of the paedophilia, it's the opportunities for corruption that can be carried on from there. It affects everybody. Oh dear. As we're talking about social history and current affairs, I'm supposed to be talking about banking. I'm here. Right. I'm going to make no apologies whatsoever for this banking quote and for reading it. And I want you to think about it and tell other people about it, just to see what we can do with it. There are loads of quotes about banking to be had. In fact, the mind boggles. The number of people who have tried to warn us in the last 200 years, seriously, is amazing. But here's just one. And it's fairly close to home. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth, take it away from them, but leave them with the power to create credit, and with the stroke of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. If you want to be slaves of the bankers and pay the costs of your own slavery, then let the bankers create money. And that was Sir Josiah Stamp, one of the directors of the Bank of England in the early part of last century. He did try. He was one of the richest men in the country at the time. Funny thing is, when I was a teenager, I used to play Monopoly. And I used to upset my friends quite a bit because I was good. I kept winning. And as the years rolled on, I started wondering, why is it that I can't win in real life? And it's taken me a good few years to work it out, but it's quite clear. The rules of Monopoly are quite straightforward. They're open, they're honest. Everyone's got a chance. Everyone's got the opportunity. And it's down to how you use those opportunities and whether you see the opportunity. The rules in the real world are bent to hell against us. I ended up getting thrashed in the years up to 2000 in business by these people that we've been talking about. And I lost a business that I'd built up over 14 years. But that's another story. But I speak from experience. It took a couple of years for me to actually get round to asking some serious questions as to what had happened. And that would be about September 2000. And by December of 2003, my studies convinced me that the banking connection is absolutely critical to everything else. There's no point in trying to go for ecological reform or humanitarian reform if you don't put reform of the banking system up at top of the list. because ultimately, if you don't, you're wasting your time. What actually happened was, I read somewhere that I thought was nonsense, that the words fractional reserve banking had been taken out of textbooks, and that it was possible for people to go quite high in banking and economics generally, without actually understanding anything about it. And I thought, we can't do that. And it was Christmas Eve of 2003, we were in Salisbury, and I went to the library and all the bookshops I could find. They had some then. And I looked at all the books on economics and money and banking and whatever. And you know, they were right. You go to the index, pointless looking in the contents, go to the index, and you get E, F, F, R, A, France. And as soon as you get to France, without finding fractional, you know it's not there, because FRAC, FRAN. And time after time, I'm in the index, France, France, France. I went back home and I Googled fractional reserve banking. And I got about 16,000 websites that mentioned fractional reserve banking. I thought, something's going on here. And currently, it's about 115,000. It's gone up about tenfold in 7 years. And of course, it's not just the bank. The banks are very, very well tied to the legal system, which the likes of the British Constitution Group are helping us to understand. And there's one very, very important point. Loads of people now are beginning to catch on to the fact that they do create money out of thin air. I mean, it's everywhere. I don't have to go over that again. I'm taking it as everybody knows. But what often gets missed, and it is absolutely critical, is the fact that when they create the money out of nothing, when they create the capital, they don't create the interest. The money they create is debt. It carries interest. Say, for argument's sake, £1,000 over a year at 10%. When it gets paid back at the end of the year, the person has to pay back 1,000 and 100. Where does 100 come from? Out of our pockets, out of somebody's pocket. So if you take 10 people, some are going to win, some are going to lose. And that's what we've got in life. We've got people who think, I don't know what's the matter with you, everything's fine. And generally, those are the sort of people that are inclined to adopt psychopathic behaviour because it benefits them at the cost of others. And those who are more considerate and more careful tend to be the losers. It's reflected in Monopoly, the board game, with the £200 for passing go. You know, I used to think that £200 for passing go was your wages. It isn't. That's the money supply. Your wages are what you earn from acquiring some property and renting it out, or catching people on your railway station, or your waterworks, or whatever. That's your wages. The £200 for passing go is spent into the economy, just as the government could spend money into the economy. So that as the game grows and more money is needed, every time someone passes go, they get £200. So the money supply keeps pace with the size of the game. That's what it's all about. In real life, every time you pass go, the bastards take £200 off you. And the economy's growing, we've got to have economic growth. We've got to get the economy moving, but all the time that's happening, the money supply is being drained away in the interest. And this is nationally, it's with businesses, and it's with us personally. Everything has the interest on the even if someone personally hasn't got any debts at all, they haven't got a mortgage or anything, they haven't borrowed any money for anything, they're still paying interest on the national debt at a horrendous rate. Horrendous. And oddly enough, if you think about what I said at the beginning, that where 97% of our money supply is actually debt, it's not money at all. We don't live in a capitalist society, do we? We live in a debt society. It's not capital. We're not working with capital. And then we get on to the Dutch prince and the Armada. I'll just briefly explain the national debt, what actually happened. In our history books, the last time we were supposedly invaded was 1066. God, where's that donkey? What a load of bollocks. In 1688, we apparently had a glorious revolution. Except our king was deposed and a Dutch prince took his place. Now, this Dutch prince actually left Holland with an army on an armada of ships, landed in Devon and marched on London. Now, he happened to be married to the king's daughter, but they didn't get on very well. So he deposed his own father-in-law. And apparently, the plan was that he was going to be regent and Mary was going to be queen. But once he got to London, he said, nah, either I'm king with Mary as queen, or I'm going back to Holland. And they allowed him to be king. Oddly, Mary didn't last very long after that. I think she died not long after the Bank of England got its charter. And the Bank of England got its charter 1694. I don't know whether anybody's aware of this, but a similar thing happened with the Federal Reserve, where I think it was done Christmas holidays, when the bank was sorted out in America. In our case, they did it in July, when a lot of people were away on holiday. And what they do, you have an act about fish and chips. And you wait till it's gone through all the process of and then at the last minute, when nobody's watching, you slip a chapter in about diamonds. And out of nowhere, you've got a law passed or a charter passed to do with diamonds, but it's hidden from view. And that actually happened with the Bank of England, where it was stuck on the back of the Tonnage Act, which had a lot to do with ships and how much you could carry and stuff like that. It still goes on today. You think the MP's expenses is disgraceful. It goes way deeper than that. So, money created out of thin air, but they don't create the interest. Very important. There's a lady I met because of some work I was doing, well, because I was studying the issues. She's actually, she runs the Forum for Stable Currencies. A lady called Sabine McNeil. She's German. She's one of the few people that got out alive from Dresden. And she does some absolutely amazing work. Again, she's on the list. You will not believe the stuff that she gets involved with. I can see I'm taking longer than I intended, so I'm going to have to cut a lot of stuff out here. Before I started what is now Inquiring Minds, I worked for about a year doing battle on a website on financial issues. And I suppose my job was to put the alternatives forward, and I actually gave up, I think, after I'd been banned for 6 times and managed to get myself reinstated because I wanted to interact with people face to face. The web's fine for some things, but it can drive you nuts. I mean, it's quite a hostile environment. You have some really unpleasant people there, and some of them were very clearly MI5, MI6, Mossad, CIA, purposely trying to discredit anybody who challenged the status quo. In actual fact, when I started doing the film last year, it was to do the money stuff originally. And I just got well sidetracked. Something to do with crop circles, I think, I can't remember. During the time I'd spent fighting, I quite often fought Sabine's corner. And as a result of that, I got an invitation to a meeting in the Grand Committee room at Westminster. Liz and I went there, which was quite an experience. For some strange reason, she meets in the Houses of Parliament. And I had quite a bizarre experience of being sort of bullied into making a speech in room 14, which has now become quite famous. And somehow I managed to include David Icke, political Ponerology, in with the little I knew about money reform. And I got a round of applause and some cheers. And I think possibly that was because I closed by thanking Sabine for inviting us all and suggested that it was a rather strange choice of venue to start a revolution. Cash as a medium of exchange has been virtually replaced by credit as a tool for control. Spot on. And here's something really, really important. This is her work. Just on some of the links that I'll be giving you. The purpose of the credit crunch. What was the purpose of the credit crunch? Was there a purpose? Was it an accident? Oh, those poor banks. Oh, they've lost all that money. Oh, they've screwed up. Nah, there was a purpose. The purpose was to destroy our economy, to destroy Britain. Not only Britain, but to suck the wealth out of the people. And there it is, up here. If you look at the top, the blue line at the very top is expenditure from 2001 to 2010-ish. Going up all the time. They're spending more and more money. The one below that, which I think is red, is receipts, money coming into the government. And you see that end of 2007 into 2008, there's a huge drop. You can look into that. The government receipts for all sorts of things. I mean, in particular, the money they've been making out of houses, people's homes, mortgages, and the whole housing industry. So you've got a huge, you're carrying on having to spend the money, but you've got a huge drop in income. And that's, if you hear people talking about local government and having to have cuts and laying people off and a reduction in services, that's the purpose of the credit crunch, to screw us rotten even more. And there's the net result, the deficit. So the deficit was getting worse, and it shot up because the banks messed up. Ha! No chance. And here it is in text. The purpose of the credit crisis. Bankruptcy of the real economy. The real economy. Not all this derivative stuff. Spiraling public debt. Centralisation of corporate power. Concentration of wealth in a few hands. And the globalisation of poverty. I've personally been very aware of, on the one hand, the injustice of the banking system and what it does to people. And on the other hand, the real world where there's very little you can do about it. It's been quite frustrating. I've watched my family grow up and I've seen the difficulties they've had and the difficulty that Liz and I have had. And I think, well, this just isn't fair. We've got no way of fighting back. But you know, things are changing. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, possibly an unexpected or unwarranted, unintended side effect of the banking rip-off. It sort of acted as a midwife to the birth of a rebellion. There's my list again. If this ever gets to YouTube, you can tell people who can freeze frame that and get all these links off. I just threw those on this morning. I ran out of space. I didn't want to make the text too small. But I say, if you want the list, just email me and I'll send you it so you can just cut and paste into your browser. Yeah, there's some really good people come on the scene. Brian Gerrish, who not long ago stood exactly where I am, with the British Constitution Group, UK Column Purpose. UK Column, Common Purpose, exposed. That was one of his ships. It's a strange change of job description. Good old John Harris. This is John at the 3rd Lawful Rebellion conference in London. Except he was looking at maybe having an awful rebellion. And of course there's Dick. Dick's the smaller chap on the right hand side, in case you don't know. Likewise. And an interesting thing has come about. He's invented the Landless Peasant Party. And if you get the chance to see his AV4 presentation, I suggest you do. He believes we're all landless peasants and it's a very important issue. But he's done it specifically so that he can stand up against Gordon Brown in Gordon Brown's constituency in a couple of weeks' time. Dick has agreed to come here and create merry hell sometime when it makes sense. He's a really funny bloke. Just don't bring the children. You've even got this chap, Ben, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. That's how deep it's going. And I've titled this, Beware the Awakening Process, because there are stumbling blocks. There are things where we might not really be aware of what it is that we're doing. And I'm sure he's a good chap, he does a lot of good work, but he seems completely messed up when it comes to crop circles. He's talking about being somewhere, he says, I promised myself that I wouldn't buy any more books. In the end, I succumbed when I went to the Nexus stall and saw the crop circle book, The Bones of God by Michael Glickman. Glickman is probably my favourite croppy, and I've been meaning to get one of his books. Sadly, his wonderful crop circle lectures are no longer available. We'll let that one ride. And then a very interesting chap called John Witterick, who perhaps in a technical way has done something really incredible. If you think about it, the sort of stuff that I've been talking about the banks and what they've done and what we suffer because of it, it's really sort of up there somewhere, isn't it? It's like you can't really sort of grasp it, and it's out of our hands and all the rest of it. But then, when you see a young couple arguing about money and the pressure that they're under because of the way they've been treated by their employers or whatever else, the two things are desperately related. I could explain more about the not creating the interest. Not creating the interest generates competitiveness because somebody's going to lose out. So it's huge. It's absolutely massive, this interest thing. But what John has actually done, he's gone headlong into attacking the monster. Did I say monster? That's 1970, Stephen Wolf. Had the right idea. And some chaps put that together. The chap that you saw playing guitar, he's put that together as a protest recently. Getting back to John Whitterick, he's got a scheme that challenges the legality. If anybody's borrowed any money, say a bank loan or credit card stuff, he's developed a way of challenging, which is incredibly interesting, and I recommend you have a look. And interestingly, something I found out myself to be absolutely true. If you've got a problem and you go to Citizens Advice Bureau, and beyond that, perhaps go to CCCS, the advice that they give you is absolute rubbish. They're feeding you to the monster. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. The system that John's put together with some friends, and it's all over the world now, is different to what you get from normal debt counsellors. I keep doing what?
What was the last one?
That was. No, I took him outside the last one. I took him outside and beat him up. No, I let him go. Right, here's a bit from John, which I hope you'll find interesting. Yeah.
Never seen one that small. Oh dear, right. Okay, so you just bear with me on this one. Just going to finish with a poem. Some of you might have come across it before, but it's for me, it means a lot to me, this one. On the surface of the world right now, there is war and violence, and things seem dark. But calmly and quietly, at the same time, something else is happening underground. An inner revolution is taking place, and certain individuals are being called to a higher light. It is a silent revolution, from the inside out, from the ground up. This is a global operation, a spiritual conspiracy. There are sleeper cells in every nation on the planet. You won't see us on the TV, you won't read about us in the newspaper, and you won't hear about us on the radio. We don't seek any glory. We don't wear any uniform. And we come in all shapes, sizes, colours and styles. Most of us work anonymously. We are quietly working behind the scenes in every country and every culture of the world. Cities, big and small, mountains and valleys, in farms and villages, tribes and remote islands. You could pass by one of us on the street and not even notice. We go undercover. We remain behind the scenes. It is of no concern to us who takes the final credit, but simply that the work gets done. Occasionally we spot each other in the street. We have a quiet nod and continue on our way. During the day, many of us pretend to have normal jobs. But behind the false storefront, at night is where the real work takes place. Some of us call us the conscious army. We are slowly creating a new paradigm with the power of our minds and our hearts. We follow with compassion, with passion and joy. Our orders come from a central spiritual intelligence. We are dropping secret love bombs when no one's looking. Poems, hugs, music, photography, movies, kind words, smiles, meditation and prayer, dance, social activism, websites, blogs, and random acts of kindness. We each express ourselves in our own unique ways, with our own unique gifts and talents. Be the change you want to see in the world. This is the motto that fills our hearts. We know it is the only way real transformation will take place. We know that quietly and humbly we have the power of all the oceans combined. Our work is slow and meticulous, like the formation of mountains. It's not even visible at first glance, and yet, with it, entire tectonic plates shall be moved in centuries to come. Love is the new religion of the 21st century. You don't have to be a highly educated person or have exceptional knowledge to understand it. It comes from the intelligence of the heart, embedded in the timeless evolutionary pulse of all human beings. Be the change you want to see in the world. No one else can do it for you. We are now recruiting. Perhaps you'll join us. Already have done. All are welcome. The door is open. Thank you very much.
As I said before, there's a huge spiritual element in all this. And a movement away from the shadows. A movement away from the influence of the true psychopaths. This was in the UK column in January, but I'd just like to read the very last sentence. Lawful rebellion is your statement that enough is enough, and you are now working with and alongside others in your area and at a distance by email and telephone to restore truth, honesty, morality and kindness to our lives. Enough is enough. Just say no. And I'm done. I got some more music for you. We had music when we came in, and we go out with Lighthouse Family. Thank you.
På denne veien der alt som før, det lyset og varmen, regnet og snøen som forandrer alt. Men veien jeg går som før.
going back to the subject of bollocks, Malcolm has busted his own to bring us these brilliant nights, and you know, and these great speakers that we've had up to date, and the great speakers that we're going to have in the future. So, to quote John Cleese from The Life of Brian, we need doers in this movement, Brian, and Malcolm is definitely a doer. So, another round of applause.